Hi book lovers, I am officially in fall mood and fall is like my favorite season. I love everything about fall, and you can also see I changed up the background a little bit. We're gonna talk about one of my favorite things today, books obviously, but book recommendations for fall. And I think I almost had like an endless list for fall recommendations because, as I said, it's just the best time also to read. I also think that fall is just the most versatile. There are so many genres that scream fall to me. So I've got a lot of book recommendation for you guys, and I put them in all the different categories. So I always have chapters down below if you're interested in a particular genre, but if you're here for all of them, then welcome. You're gonna get a lot of recommendations. I have witchy books for you. I have obviously romance books for you that are perfect for fall. I have dark romances because if you want to try out dark romance, then definitely I feel like fall is the season for it. Obviously, going into the darker genre also means we can go into mystery and thrillers. And then another genre that fits perfectly into the season is fantasy. Just the atmosphere and getting involved in a completely new world and cozy up with a book, with a bigger series. I hope you guys are excited because I am pumped. I have so many good recommendations for you guys. And I actually wanted to do a video where I give you my fall recommendations, then my own TBR and even new releases. But once I put this list together, I was like, this is just too much for one video. So I'm gonna do another video just for my TBR and also for releases. So with all that being said, let's start with the witchy books. And there's so many out there, and here are the ones that I read that I would recommend to you guys. The first one, I actually lent it to a friend, so I don't have it with me right now, but that is The Ex-Hex. As you might get from the title, this is about a second chance romance, and this is perfect to read around Halloween because really this place basically in a small Halloween town, and it just gives you the atmosphere of fall and Halloween. This is definitely a bit more silly. It's not gonna be the most profound romance, but it is so much fun. And I actually have the Kiss Curse here, which is the second book in this, I think it's a trilogy to be honest, and I haven't read this one yet, but spoiler, this is gonna be on my fall TBR. One thing we probably all thought at one moment is, if we were a witch, what would we do with our shitty ex? And I feel like if you're in the mood for that kind of thing, then Payback is a Witch is for you. This is actually a sapphic romance, and they team up to get back at their shitty ex. And you kind of have like this spellcasting tournament in here. And again, this is just so much fun and just the best atmosphere to read around Halloween if you want a witchy book. I almost forgot my tea. Then the last book with witches I have for you guys is Go Hex Yourself by Jessica Clare, and this is probably my favorite out of all the witchy books. It's actually the guy that is a witch. Is a guy a witch, or is there like a different name for a man that's a witch? I don't think there's in German. Hexa? I don't know. It says here that Ben the guy is a warlock. So maybe that's the masculine version of witch. Anyway, so this is about Reggie and Ben, and Reggie applies for this job where she thinks she's applying for her favorite card game, Spellcraft, but she's actually applying to be the assistant of a real witch, which is Ben's aunt, and she has to move in with Ben's aunt, so she's around Ben a lot, and they don't really get on. So you have a little bit of enemies to lovers or rivals to lovers, and it's just a lot of fun. Moving on from the witches to one of my favorite genre, romance. And I narrowed it down to 5 great romances for fall. Obviously, I could give you 20, but we all have to start somewhere. So the first one is from one of my favorite authors, Lauren Asher, and this is Love Redesigned. This is a small town romance between childhood rivals and family frenemies. And this is perfect for the fall because, first of all, small town just screams fall. I mean, we're all watching Gilmore Girls anyway, and even if you're not really a small town romance girly, then you should definitely become one during fall because it's just the perfect vibe. Julian and Dahlia have to work together to renovate this old mansion, and this takes part during like late summer going into fall, and they're doing a lot of like fall themed things here, especially in the small town in general. Lauren Asher's writing is just so easy to go through, and even if it looks thicker, don't be scared because it definitely doesn't feel like it. Then one of my absolute favorite romances that I think is also perfect for fall, so of course I had to mention it, is The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. And I mean, if you look at this cover, then obviously you think about fall and maybe winter. Kala, our main girl, is going to Alaska to visit her dad, who she hasn't really had a relationship for years. And while there, she meets this grumpy bush pilot. And this one is just so good. This one has a lot of emotional depth to it. And I feel like saying that this is just a romance is not really saying enough, because to me, this was so much more. And obviously, I love the romance and it's still the forefront, but there's also other things going on. And just in general, the whole atmosphere, I enjoyed it so much, being like way out in nature in Alaska, where basically almost no one lives. And it was so amazing to explore. If you really enjoy this one, then you can definitely go into the second one, which follows this story. So it's the same couple. Again, I feel like the cover already screams fall, but you definitely get the fall-winter vibes when you read this duology. I absolutely ate them up, and I also read them during fall and winter. So in fall, we start cozy season. We want to snuggle up, we want to read inside with a candle, with our blanket, and sometimes you also want the book to feel like a warm hug. And to me, the one book that I feel just is so comforting and does feel like a warm hug is Marriage for One by Ella Mays. Don't mind the cover. I mean, he's a pretty guy, but the cover doesn't really scream cozy. However, the story definitely is. This is a marriage of convenience trope where Rose has to marry someone in order to get her inheritance, and she would inherit this building where she wants to put in her own cafe. So Jack offers to marry her in order to get the building, but she would get the cafe. And who doesn't want to create their own cafe, but also have this perfect stranger who's also now your husband and helps you with everything? This one is just... I need to reread this, because this is just really the most comforting book. I wouldn't say that the stakes in here are super high and the plot is super crazy, but you just see how two people that were strangers fall in love. And I love when a book makes you actually see how they fall in love and how they would work as a couple. This one is one of my favorite books, so I definitely recommend reading this one. Another perfect fall romance for me is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. Abby Jimenez is just so good at writing romance that are funny but also have a lot of depth, have great characters, and I absolutely love her writing. There's just something about her books where you think, oh, maybe the fates, the universe, something magical is happening between these people, and it's not magical realism, not at all, but just like the feel of it. And that's why I think this is so perfect for fall. And I think they're also very cozy and comforting. I recently read Yours Truly, which is the second book in this trilogy, and I also love this one. Basically same vibes. I'm just recommending you this first since it is the first book, and you don't have to read them in order, but I would highly suggest it because you just get everything out of it. And also these books are all so great, so they're not a skip. In this one you also escape to a small town because Alexis had this one night stand with a younger guy who she just can't stop thinking about, and she goes back to, but they're from completely different worlds and nothing really seems to match, and you don't know how a relationship between these two could ever work out, and you do have to question whether feelings can always be enough. My last romance recommendation is Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren, and I mean, look at the cover. Doesn't this already scream fall to you guys? This again is just such a warm book. If I would call a couple soulmates, I would probably choose these two. This is a childhood friends to lovers to strangers to lovers story. You have a now and then timeline, and this book has so much angst, so much tension, but also so much comfort. And if you want a very good childhood friends to lovers and second chance romance, I would highly recommend Love in Other Words. Going from romance into dark romances, there's just something with morally grey characters that get even sexier during the fall and winter season, I think. The first book I have here is actually The Sinner's Duet. So the first one is There Are No Saints, and the second one is There Is No Devil, and you have to read them in order. And this is a love story with a serial killer. Yes, it is that unhinged, but it's also that much fun. I think dark romances in general, like I don't read them to have the most profound deep emotional romance. You can get that obviously, but I mostly read them for entertainment. If you want to see a serial killer all gone for this one girl, then I would definitely recommend The Sinner's Thread. I also think that Sophie Lark is a good entrance to darker romance if you want to try it out. I also love this edition. This is the special edition from Internal Embers and Larry Reeds from YouTube, and it's gorgeous. She did an amazing job. Another great dark romance series for fall, I think, is the Never After series. I have Twisted. This is actually the only book I read from that series, so they're not actually connected in any way. They just all take inspiration from a fairy tale and make the villain the love interest. They're not fantasy, so they're set in real world, but you definitely see where the inspiration comes from. So Twisted, for example, is a Aladdin retelling, and this is Marriage of Convenience, which is why I chose this one. I think technically this is the fourth one in the series, and I am interested in the other ones. I definitely want to read more. There's also the new one coming out, Hexed, which is a Little Mermaid retelling. But if you have a favorite fairy tale and you want the villain to get the girl, maybe check one of these ones out. There's also Hooked, which is a Peter Pan retelling. Then Scarred, who is the Lion King, and Wretched, which is, I think, the Wizard of Oz retelling. But as I said, just choose the one that interests you the most. Then talking of dark romances, I have to mention one series that I read recently, and I will take every chance I can to talk about this series because I loved my time with it. And if you want to go into longer dark romance series, I would recommend the Legacy of God series. I read this entire series for a week and it was so good. I didn't love every single book because I think in dark romance, it's not really about love, it's about obsession, and that's okay. And when I read the first book, God of Malice, I never thought I would rate one of these books a 5-star. And I like it as entertainment, but it's not really 5-star material for me. But then, God of Fury, the 5th book, without words, one of the best books I read this year. And let me tell you guys, read the series just for that book. And also be aware that this series is a lot more darker than the other two I just mentioned. And they're not just more unhinged, but what I also liked about them actually, they're not apologizing for the bad things they're doing. Whenever you think the guy could do something sweet or cute now, no. He's doing the opposite. It's not about being cute and sweet. That's not why we read dark romance. The Legacy of God series by Rena Kent is actually part of her whole Rena universe. In this series, you basically have all the kids from her other books. And I personally haven't read the other books. I started with the Legacy of God series, so you don't have to. But just so you know, and they're all in college together. So you have the Americans and you have the British families, and they're like rivals at campus, and it's just so much fun. You have the whole group dynamic, and there's also one thing where they play a game that's basically like The Purge, like the movie. Kind of reminded me of that. So if you're into that, maybe try out this series. Another big thing for fall is definitely fantasy. And I also have the most recommendations for you guys for the fantasy genre. So let's start with the first one, which is The Invisible Life of Eddie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. And this one to me was so unique. So you follow Eddie LaRue, who made a deal with one of the dark gods to gain her freedom. And in return, she basically gets to live for forever, but she never gets remembered by anyone. Until one day, someone does remember her. And this book is very atmospherical. So Eddie LaRue was born in the 18th century. So you do get a lot of glimpses in different time periods. And it's just a very beautiful story. It is very beautifully written. It's definitely a bit slower. This is not like an action-packed fantasy. It's also set in the real world. So this is not like a complicated fantasy world. And even if you don't really like fantasy, this is still a book I would recommend to try out. It is not the same story and definitely different, but it still gave me the same vibes as the movie The Age of Adeline with Blake Lively. So if you like that movie, maybe check out The Invisible Life of Eddie LaRue. In terms of more of like a historical fantasy, I definitely recommend Divine Rivals for fall as well, because again, this is just very atmospherical and this is a beautiful love story. It's also a duet. In this book, you have Iris and Roman, who both have these magical typewriters and they're able to write each other notes and letters, and it only gets delivered to the other person. And in this world, there's also a war going on, and they're both actually journalists who are rivals because they're trying to get the same job. This was just really beautiful, and again, I really love the atmosphere in this book. I still haven't read the second one, so that one is also on my fall TBR. I think I have to start another pile. I only have the third book with me, but the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy is so amazing and definitely something that's really suitable for fall because that series just feels like you're stepping into a fairy tale. In the first book, you follow Evangeline, who goes to one of the fates and makes the deal because her one true love is marrying someone else and she can't just stand by it and let it all happen since she believes that there's something wrong. But in making the deal with the fate Jax, who is the Prince of Hearts, she owes him 3 kisses and he can decide when and where and also who she's supposed to kiss. If you want a very cozy fantasy with low stakes, I definitely recommend Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. This is such a cute and atmospheric story. You follow Emily, who goes to one of the Scandinavian countries, I think, and she's a professor. She wants to study folklore and the fairy kings there. And then very unexpectedly, another professor from her university, her rival, arrives as well and brings a little bit of chaos with him because Emily is not really a people's person. She's very much an introvert and she's basically the opposite of Wendell, but they have to work together now. And this is just the perfect book to be in bed and drink a cup of coffee with. A very popular fantasy series that I just have to talk about as well is the Powerless series. This is for me as if Hunger Games and the Shatter Me series made a baby and it turned out very, very well. I can't believe that Powerless is actually Lauren Roberts' first book because I think her writing is just so great. And you have this great enemies to lovers romance in here as well with amazing banter. So if this sounds something like you would enjoy, definitely check out Powerless. If you want a smutty, standalone fantasy romance between a werewolf and a vampire, which is just perfect for Halloween, spooky and fall season, go and read Bride by Ellie Hazelwood. This book took me by surprise because I thought, okay, werewolf and vampire, this kind of sounds like Twilight fan fiction, and it kind of does read like that because Ellie Hazelwood comes from like fan fiction and I really like that about her writing style. It is so addicting and this one was just so good. You have to be okay with like the werewolf vampire lovemaking and love languages, let's call it that. This is also Marriage of Convenience, and werewolf and vampires live here with the humans, but vampires and werewolves don't really get along, so they actually have to marry to kind of bring the two species closer together. But as there are natural enemies, obviously this marriage also starts as enemies. Then my last fantasy recommendation is The Serpent and the Wings of Night, which is a Crowns of Nyxera novel. And this is a duology, and the easiest way to describe the story is Hunger Games, but make it with vampires. And obviously everything with vampires, I have to immediately think about fall and Halloween. So if you haven't read these books yet, I'd highly recommend them. They're adult fantasy, they have great spice, they also have a great balance of plot and romance. And I think Carissa Broadwin is also really good at creating great characters and also side characters, because there's one storyline in here that I enjoyed so much and thought was so intriguing and interesting, and it wasn't between our two main characters, and I love when authors are able to incorporate other side characters and make them feel just as important. Like, it just feels like more of a whole world and not just, you know, a story. My next recommendations are for the mystery and thriller genre. And obviously it's the spooky season, it is time to read a mystery or thriller. I would also like to recommend you guys a horror book, but I actually haven't read one yet, but I would like to read one. So if you have any good horror recommendations, definitely leave them down below. But as in mystery and thriller, the first one I have here is The Maidens by Alex, and then I don't know how to say his last name, this is his name, but he's also the author of The Silent Patient, which I haven't read yet, but I definitely want to. But this book gives dark academia vibes. The maidens are actually students that kind of blindly follow this one professor. Mariana, who is a group therapist, kind of is suspicious of the professor because recently the best friend of her niece at the university has been killed, and she finds the professor with the maidens quite suspicious, so she starts her own investigation. This book definitely had some twists and turns I did not see coming. If you want more of like a dark gothic kind of book, then I recommend The Mad Woman's Ball by Victoria Mas. I think she's actually a French author, and this also plays in Paris in 1885, and you follow all these women who are held in this hospital for mad women. And back in the days, it was quite easy for family members, husbands, basically the men, to put women in one of those hospitals if they thought they were hysteric or mad. But once a year, the hospital holds this Fall, who kind of gives all the women hope to regain society or just have a glimpse of normality. And the women you follow share secrets and collab, and they really hope that something will change at this ball. Let's say that. And I also saw when I put my list together that this actually got turned into a movie as well. So if you read this book, you can afterwards also watch the movie. If you're someone who wants more of like a cozy mystery than a really dark and thrilling thriller, I highly recommend the Finlay Donovan series. This is the first one. Finlay Donovan is Killing It by El Cosimano. And I absolutely love this series. And I really like the idea of this book. Finlay is actually an author, and she talks to her agent in a cafe about her newest book and how she wants to kill someone in the book. A woman overhears their conversation and actually assumes that Finlay is actually a contract killer, and she wants to hire her for a job. Then a lot of things happen in here. This book doesn't really take itself too seriously, and the plot is definitely a little bit silly, but that makes the series actually really charming, and I really like the whole cast of characters, and I also really like the love story in here. Another cozy mystery / thriller is Killers of a Certain Age by Dana Rayborn, if I say that correctly. You follow 4 older women who are all retired now, but they've worked for the museum, which is like a network for assassins. And you do get glimpses back when they were recruited and also how they trained to become assassins. And this is just so much fun. And they all find themselves in the present day on a cruise ship, and obviously living the life of assassins in the past, they do have a lot of enemies. If you want a really good thriller that is actually more thrilling and not cozy, then I would highly recommend The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. I really enjoyed our main character in the book, who starts a new position as a housemaid, and she has to move in with the family, and the family kind of seems suspicious. First of all, she has to live in this really small room that has no opening windows, and also the room can only be properly closed from the outside, not the inside. And then something seems off with the mom. I like this book because I really like going through everything with our main character, and you also got to guess the whole time what is happening. You had your own theories, and even though I had my own theories, I still didn't expect the outcome, and I really enjoyed the ending. But with that, we come to my last category, which is classics. And I don't know why, but for me, fall is a season where I all of a sudden want to read a classic. And I have one classic that I want to recommend to you guys that I think, as a romance reader, if you haven't tried out Jane Austen yet, please do, because I really think that there's something from her books that is just so cozy on one hand, but also just seeing a woman write romance back in the days and how it holds up today is just so much fun. The one that I really, really like by her is Pride and Prejudice. I also watched the movie several times, and also the movie is just so great for fall. So definitely read the book first, then watch the movie and thank me later for it. And when I read Pride and Prejudice, I felt like I read the original trope of enemies to lovers, and I just really liked that. With that, I just said that I had my last category, but actually there's one more, because I feel like there's one author that just really writes for fall. And I wanted to mention her separately, but this could also be its own genre, because she writes magical realism, and I'm talking about Ashley Poston. I have The 7 Year Slip and A Novel Love Story by her. She also wrote Dead Romantics, which I think again would be perfect for fall. It's just the only one that I haven't read yet by her. Both books, and also I think Dead Romantics, are just perfect for fall. You have the magical realism element, but they're also really cozy. My favorite is definitely The 7 Year Slip, and here you follow Clementine, who kind of lives in a magical apartment that sometimes when she walks in is actually 7 years in the past, and 7 years in the past this other guy lived in that apartment, but they can only really see each other when she steps in the apartment 7 years ago. And I think the plot was just so interesting. The romance was amazing. I also loved the other topics she explored here, and again, I think this is one of the books where I definitely think, yes, this is a romance, but it's also so much more. And then A Novel Love Story is just every book lover's dream, because our main character, Elsie, basically stumbles into this town that is out of her favorite fiction series. And this small town also really gives me Gilmore Girl vibes. So being stuck in this fictional small town because her car broke down, she also meets this other guy that she can't really remember from her books, but she remembers everyone else, and she kind of feels like that there's something off. And she basically has this mission to give everyone the happily ever after, but she doesn't really know what to do with the guy who's the bookstore owner, who she's very attracted to, but she also knows that he's fictional. So what to do. I also heard great things about The Dead Romantics, so if you want to try out one author for fall, definitely check out Ashley Poston. Oh my god, there are so many book recommendations. I really hope that you found good recommendations here for fall. I'm so excited to share my fall TBR with you guys next, but let me know in the comments what recommendations you have for fall, what books you want to read this season, and give this video a like if you enjoyed it. I've been sitting here for quite a while, but I just love fall and I had so many book recommendations, as you can see, and this is also the narrowed down version, so definitely have to do a part 2 next year. But for now, give this video a like, leave a comment down below, and also subscribe for more bookish content, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!